Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown, episode 5. This is Gordon.
This is Mark.
And, we just kind of felt like we had to get to this topic eventually. If you're going to be talking about who does or doesn't, deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, you have to eventually bring up the Steroid guys.
Yeah, these are the guys. We've been asked about this by people going, how do you guys feel about it? So we'll cover them today, and, actually some interesting things.
Yeah, and I think before we even get into talking about, a lot of the biggest names that are associated with the steroids, because obviously, unfortunately, at this point, there's probably too many of them to go through in a single episode. I mean, just in general, how do you feel about the steroids? Do you think if a guy took steroids once, even connected to it, whispers, no Hall of Fame, or what's your take on it?
Well, certainly a lot of guys my age, my generation are any steroid user is a bad guy, and I don't feel that way. I've done a lot of baseball reading in my life and read about all kinds of stuff that went on years ago with guys in the 50s and the 60s taking amphetamine. So I've always been, hey, if you have a policy, against it, then that's how they should handle it. So steroid guys in, as far as I'm concerned. How about you?
I mean, I have to say, I'm pretty much the same way. I especially grew up watching a lot of these guys play. Sure. The home run chase of 98 I was 9 or 10 when that happened. So kind of a big deal. That was pretty shaping it. And I think one of the things that always struck me is people always bring this point up in reference to certain players. I think Bonds is probably the one that gets brought up most with in terms of he was a Hall of Fame player before the steroids. It's he was a Hall of Fame player after the steroids. The idea that somehow, one, how many other guys were taking steroids in the 90s and 2000s, right?
By the way, pitchers took steroids too, folks.
And and they weren't all doing as well as Barry Bonds. He was still unquestionably one of the greatest baseball players to ever touch the game. And and I'm sorry, baseball is a sport that has condoned cheating. For its entire lifetime.
Yeah, and I think the legislation against it has always been in baseball's best interests, right? The commissioner during the steroid era is a guy named Bud Selig. Mm-hmm. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, you're gonna tell me it's I remember I was a kid, but I remember them talking about steroids floating around McGwire and Sosa during that 98 home run chase, and baseball was fine looking the other way back then because they needed the help recovering. That was the first thing that really energized baseball after the 94 strike. Right. Was that thing. So baseball was fine looking the other way at that point when it was convenient for them. They didn't care until later on when, okay, now it's inconvenient for us.
You might remember the ad with Maddox and Glavine and Smoltz, all pitchers for the Braves at the time, about chicks dig the long ball, about how much they like to hit home runs.
Was that a fast food ad?
I think it might have been.
Was it a McDonald's ad?
It was something like that.
I'd have to go back and look. It's on YouTube, obviously.
But the point being, that was making light of the whole steroid thing, that even the pitchers wanted to hit the long ball. They're supposed to be stopping it.
Everybody knew. So the idea that somehow they've touched the sanctity of the game. Nobody was caring about the sanctity of the game when McGwire and Sosa were chasing 62.
So you go back to Bonds, and we're not going to talk about the stats other than the career WAR of 160. The number just amazing, 162.8. So we like an average of at least 3 per season for the player to be okay, can we think about this player as being in the Hall of Fame? Doesn't mean you're in, just means that maybe you get in the conversation.
So Bonds would have to play for 54 seasons using that metric with that career WAR. I mean, A-Rod has 117.
So it can't be steroids, all of that. You had to see the ball to hit the ball.
Exactly. So let's not totally throw out what that did. And I also look at this, if we just say any cheating can't allow you in the Hall of Fame. So what are you going to do about the spitballers that are in the Hall of Fame? You've told me the stories about Willie Mays in 61, right? With the juice or something?
Oh, red juice, yeah. Well, in the 60s, right, John Milner of the Mets, in the 70s said that Willie had some red juice in his locker. It was, deep red juice, and it was probably amphetamines. Nobody really knew. Nobody asked. It just happened.
Or it's what you're going to say, anybody that was connected to the 2019 or 20 Astros or the Red Sox, where they were implicated in those scandals, they might have stolen signs. Are all they now no longer eligible for the Hall of Fame? It's such an arbitrary reason to it. And it's like it or not, these guys are part of baseball history. They are woven into the tapestry of baseball through the ages. And to just be like, nah, we pretend they're not there.
Right, and it goes down to, and I'm not going to jump all over the baseball writers. Well, maybe a little bit, that it becomes a popularity contest.
But they make it really easy.
Yeah, who gets talked to and who doesn't, and other folks that feel strongly about protecting the sanctity of the game. Look, we don't want cheating in baseball, right? Don't want steroids in baseball. Didn't want cocaine in baseball. Don't want people betting against their own team in baseball.
Or just betting in general.
Right, betting in general.
I think you even brought up a really good point there, because you were saying, like, there is a punishment now for taking steroids. You know that it's like 80 or...
Yeah, so this was revised in 2014, 80 games for the first suspension. So the Mets' own Robinson Cano, before he came to the Mets, actually got suspended for 80 games.
I thought you were going to make a Mejia reference.
He's been labeled him as a steroid guy now, or a user or whatnot. The second one is 162 games, so you get the whole season, and the third time is permanently banned. Now, another Met, Henry Mejia, he might be the only guy ever permanently banned for continued use of steroids.
We get like 5 of them.
Of course, in baseball, you never permanently banned because they reinstated him, which just doesn't make any sense if you're permanently banned.
What's important to me there is there's a clear escalation of cases there, right? 80, 162 lifetime. You know what's not ever mentioned in those rules? Oh, by the way, you also can't be eligible for the Hall of Fame.
Good point. Right. Oh, and by the way, the kicker is, you're not in there, so too bad. You should have known that.
That's an unwritten rule if you're saying it. And personally, I think it's an unwritten rule we shouldn't be following. The same way where it's an unwritten rule where it's totally okay to steal the signs from second base using a runner, but not with a guy with a camera in center field.
Right. The shot heard around the world in 1951. There are lots of stories about the fact that they were flashing the signs from the center field camera, whether it was a mirror or somebody was relaying them, and that Bobby Thompson got the pitch. Whether that happened or not, the point was they've been trying to get an edge in this game because it's hard to play professional baseball, and you'll give up what you can to try to play at that level.
Baseball it's always been a sport where you cheat if you can get away with it. Hidden ball tricks are a thing. Like, there's so many little things teams try and do. You try and steal the signs. I remember when we were playing in high school, we would try to steal the pitching signs coming in from the pitching coach for what pitch was being called. We tried to steal the third base signs. We tried to steal the pitching signs when we were on second. We were constantly trying to do things that were technically against the rules.
I never asked you this. So, pitchers have been known to take foreign instruments on a baseball. Did you ever take like a nail file or something like that? And anything like
never
that?
even occurred to me.
Because that's happened, to pitchers that they've been caught with stuff on like emery boards and things like that.
I vaguely recall one time we had like pine tar or something like grippy for the ball, but I didn't like how it made my fingers feel because at that point they were such calluses that it felt better than like gripping the ball with whatever they were like trying to put on my fingers.
Right.
So like I never felt the need to try and do something like that.
And that was sort of, I'm going to say standard, but a lot of pitchers did it in the 50s and 60s. And Gaylord Perry, mentioned a spitballer, he was renowned to be a spitballer. It had been outlawed in 1920, as we said in the prior show. So he knew it was illegal, but you had to find it and prove it. And
you had to catch him.
Exactly. So, whether it was, Vaseline or something like that.
We talked about him in the last episode, George Brett and the pine tar thing. That technically that's cheating. You're saying that George Brett doesn't deserve it? It's so reductionist to just say any instance of cheating or this particular kind of cheating means that he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. I understand the argument coming from, well, the steroids allowed them to perform at a level that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to perform at. But it's just, how do you judge that when their peers were also doing it? Right. You're just setting up purity tests. And then at that point, it just becomes whether or not you like the guy or not.
Well, and here's a guy in Kevin Brown, who was aligned with HGH at one point, whether that happened or not, it was alleged. And he's not in the Hall of Fame. We've talked about him a little bit. There's an argument to be made that could be what's holding him back.
And he was one of the guys that we said that isn't, and that should be in. I remember talking about him in that first episode. And I think it's just, I think if you're evaluating, if you remove all of the steroid stuff, if you remove the HGH stuff, is Kevin Brown a Hall of Famer? Probably. If you're just looking at that. So then if the only reason you're keeping him out is just because of the HGH, okay, I get the hill you're standing on. I just don't agree with it.
And there are still a lot of writers that feel that way, that have the power to put people in or out. And Kevin Brown or this guy who's got an more amazing, statistical career, Clemens.
Yeah. Well, it's always hard to talk about Clemens because it's just like, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I hate him.
Right.
Like, I struggled. I mean, at the same time, I feel like any pitcher that mistakes a broken baseball bat for a ball and then throws it at a runner probably is, not totally deserving to be in the Hall of Fame. But jokes aside,
Right. No.
I mean, he's one of the most dominant pitchers over 20 years.
Yeah, we're gonna have plenty of assholes in our Hall of Fame.
Yeah, because the Hall of Fame isn't about your personal character judgments. If it was about your personal character, it'd be completely. Ty Cobb wouldn't be in the Hall of Fame.
No, people have said that, and I think it was Ted Williams, right? Because he didn't talk to one of the writers, didn't get unanimously elected. This is why Rivera became the first to be unanimously elected, because some idiot writer said Ted Williams doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame.
If you tell me Ted Williams isn't a unanimous Hall of Famer.
So that's what makes writers crazy, and me crazy about writers that think that way. Let's talk about a few other guys that I
think that's the next one big. It's probably one of the biggest. If not one of the biggest when you think about it. But one of the biggest certainly is McGwire.
Yeah.
So throw out steroids just for a minute. You're not counting steroids. You're not thinking about them. Is McGwire a Hall of Famer?
I say yes, and I say it for these reasons. Not just the 70 home run season, but that he was a good fielder on a good team. The career home run stats are, very, very high. And I think he was a good ball player on good teams, and at times the best player at his position in the league for an extended period. How about you?
I tend to think of it the same way. I think the Hall of Fame is about making sure we're including people that had an undeniable impact on the game of baseball. And you would be hard-pressed to find anybody that wouldn't admit that Mark McGwire had a complete mark on the history of baseball. I mean, he set the home run record. That 98 season, there was that 30 for 30 documentary that came out that I need to watch. I need to watch it too. But, I mean, that was so important. And the Bash Brothers was so important. Like, he is such an important person to the history of baseball. Even if you have him in there as a cautionary tale, he deserves to be in there.
Yeah.
And I think it's like one of the 12 highest WARs of first baseman of all time.
I just thought of this as we're talking about it. I don't want to get off track, but, Roger Maris probably is in a similar... I think McGwire has many more career home runs than Maris.
I think McGwire's career statistics definitely
But Maris had a good career and had that epic season, I guess, the point when they're chasing with the hair falling out, trying to pass Ruther. And McGwire had that same kind of stress when he was battling with Sosa, that particular year. So, but yeah, I just feel like, and it's interesting. So how about the other guy then in the home run chase in 98? How would you feel about him?
With Sosa, I don't know. It's for some reason, even though if you look at his career numbers, they're actually almost more impressive than McGwire's. I mean, he's the only player to hit 60 home runs in 3 consecutive seasons.
I forgot that. You're right.
He has over 600 career home runs. McGwire was at least passable on defense at points in his career. I don't think anybody would even give Sosa a passable.
No, I'd say Sammy would be indifferent to defense.
It was something that he was forced to do.
Exactly. He had somewhere to go between innings.
But he probably... for whatever reason, it's harder for me to want to say that Sosa deserves to be in than McGwire, even though the numbers are there. The career average it's better than you think, but it's still not great.
Right.
A god-awful defender.
But,
and a god-awful teammate from all
for years, it was 400 home runs would get you into the Hall of Fame. And 500 for sure. This guy has over 600. We're thinking, okay, so, now you're dinging him for an accomplishment that not that long ago would have been a no-brainer. Correct.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I feel like my personal feelings about Sosa aside, he probably deserves to be
Maybe
in
if
there.
it was one in and one out, you might go...
Yeah, if you told me I had to pick between McGwire and Sosa, I probably pick McGwire. And is that unfair because it's probably because he won that race and Sosa didn't? Maybe. But...
Yeah. And here's another thing why I guess I'm with you on the... I don't know why that I like McGwire more than Sosa, but heard that he was like one of the worst teammates of all time.
Sosa, you're saying.
Sosa.
Yeah.
That should not matter.
No, it doesn't.
It shouldn't matter. That's an opinion, there are probably a lot of lousy guys.
Especially because who's not voting in the Hall of Fame? That dude's teammates.
Right.
So, you're literally relying on opinions from players filtered to a sports writer for whether or not this guy was a good teammate.
And that's one of the problems, again, with the voting. We won't get into it here, but, so let's say you played years ago and they put you on one of the committees, and then you are promoting this particular player who might have been your teammate, who you really liked, who's a marginal player, and you actively lobby to get him into the Hall of Fame. And there have been occasions, I'm not going to talk about it, where this happened. Maybe we'll talk about that some other time.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I know has happened to varying degrees. But I think it can also happen in reverse. We got a guy like Sosa, who, because of his reputation, there's definitely other guys on this list that's going to have this problem, get kind of unfairly held out. And I think it's interesting because the next two guys I kind of feel like I equate similarly to Sosa in that they probably should be in, but for whatever reason, I don't want to put them in, and that's Palmeiro and Pettit.
Yeah. I think I would agree with you on Palmeiro, and I don't love Pettit because he was a Yankee and just frustrated, but I'll get into the reasons why, so I kind of am in between on that.
On both, yeah, starting with Palmeiro, it's just like, I mean, he was definitely playing when I was growing up. I don't really ever remember seeing much or hearing much about him, but he was also playing for the Rangers, and when you're growing up,
their home games here.
Exactly. I'm seeing maybe a Ranger game a season. And there was an interleague play when I was a kid, if I remember correctly. I don't remember that started.
Probably around the time you started watching, there was interleague play for sure.
Do you remember
90s.
The
Yeah,
90s. It was sometime in the 90s, but it was like the Mets didn't play the Rangers certainly every season. It wasn't like
every 3 or 4 years you might play.
And they might not even be playing a home series for that. I don't know if they played home in.
You're right. It wasn't the same as it is now.
So, if that's the case, I might have never literally seen Rafael Palmeiro play outside of highlights on Sports Center. So at that point, you're just going off of, oh wow, he's got a pretty big number next to that home run stat.
Yeah, well, his stats, like you said, are like you look at him going, wow. If you didn't put his name on him, and you look at those stats, you go, this is good.
But it's like really the most unremarkable. Yeah. He's like the top 8 for first baseman wars, but he's like the most unremarkable kind of thing. That's a
great point because I think even when I watched him play, I can think of a bunch of other first basemen that were playing at the same time as he was that were better than he was.
McGwire.
Yeah.
Got another guy that's in the Hall of Fame, Tommy.
Yeah.
He was a contemporary.
So he wasn't even the best player in his own league, maybe ever, at that position.
Yeah, because then you get into the later 2000s, and he had started. I can't remember what he was like in the early 2000s, but I don't remember him being a dominant force at that point. Not the same way that got him to where he was at his height, certainly, but he might have been.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
I think he was in the Cubs and went to. He came up with the Cubs or something like that for like a cup of coffee. Then went to the Orioles.
And then he was on the Orioles, and then he was. I remember him as a Ranger.
Yeah. And that ballpark was thought of as a little hitter friendly, so you also kind of dinged him for that.
Yeah, but you're gonna punish every Yankee that plays in New Yankee Stadium now.
But on the stats, and even though I don't like him, I think I might have to come around and say a guy like that. You got to be fair. Why am I dinging because I don't like him?
Yeah, that
I'm like the writers.
Exactly. Then I'm no better than that because it's like ultimately the stats say he has the WAR, he has the home runs, he has the average. If he's one of the top 8 first basemen in WAR, he probably deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
Okay. So how about Pettit? Because I think this is a good one.
And the worst part is I think I just painted myself into a corner with my last argument. Because this is I don't think Pettit. Nothing about Pettit's career, when you think about any one individual season, is like, that guy's a Hall of Fame pitcher.
And one of the big things I just thought of this is he was never the number 1 pitcher on the Yankees.
He was the number 3 a lot of the time.
Right. So, that how can you be in the Hall of Fame and not even be the number 1 in your own team?
Yeah, he has no Cy Youngs, only 3 All-Star game appearances. So you look at Andy Pettit and say he's your kid. To me, he's a pitcher compiler.
And to your argument, I would say that he played for really good teams, like championship teams.
And that might have more benefit to you as a pitcher than as a hitter.
Well, that's how he got 253 wins.
You put him on those Mets teams in the 90s and 2000s. He's not have 253 wins.
But his other statistics are better than you think, consistent over a long time. And then you get, when I read the stupid stat that he's got the 12th best record all time for a left-hander. You don't like that stat.
No, God. I mean, the problem is that at least with batters, you've got so many more people. If you're talking about, 30 teams with a starting first baseman, that's a lot of starting first basemen that have played. The number of first basemen, whereas the number of left-handed starting pitchers that are Hall eligible, I don't know what that number is, and I don't know if that's less than I'm thinking or more than I'm thinking.
Well, there's 19 to 20,000 players that have played all time in baseball, so you figure there has to be at least a couple of thousand left-handers.
Right. So having the top 12 is probably, but it's just like at the same time, I just
Okay. Wait. No, so I'm sorry. The postseason stuff, does that, and we should talk a little bit how we feel about that too.
I mean, he was great in the postseason. I think does he have the most wins of all time in the postseason?
He might have the most innings.
Certainly, he pitched a ton in the postseason. And I think with postseason stuff, it could only help you.
Right.
Because I feel like if you're at the point where you're talking about postseason stuff, you're basically saying the numbers probably either say he should be in, and you're looking for a reason not to include him. Or, I guess in this favor kind of works for me, he's somebody that's borderline and you're looking for something to put him over the edge. So I don't think it should hurt you, but I think in Pettit's case, postseason success definitely should help him.
But the argument for you is the same as me in terms of the steroid impact is, who cares?
I don't care. That's not why
we can argue him being in or out on the merits of his career.
Exactly. The same way. It's like, I guess, back just quick to resolve up the playoff thing. I don't know if Rivera is the first unanimous Hall of Famer if he isn't as dominant in the postseason as he was.
Oh, I think that absolutely gets in your head and makes you think, yeah, this guy is a no-brainer. You're right.
Like, I think that benefited him because not only was he the best closer of all time, he was the best closer of all time when it mattered.
So one of Rivera's teammates, well, this is good. This is good. One of Rivera's teammates is not in the Hall of Fame, an alleged steroid user. And if not for one playoff or World Series that was good, would have been a miserable failure, and yet statistically has a career WAR of 117.
Yeah. A-Rod lost a season to HG. Like, he lost a season due to the biogenesis scandal. He was suspended, I think, another time for steroids or illicit substances along that line. He's still a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I mean, you can penalize him for saying stupid things, and there are a few people better than A-Rod at saying stupid things.
Oh, yeah. Canseco.
Yeah, well, he's an idiot.
I guess we hold A-Rod to a slightly higher standard than that.
Absolutely. So,
but,
yeah.
I mean, just those career stats are otherworldly.
But we would have been talking, wasn't the 2009 World Series that he had the good World Series? But until that time,
he was
sort
dreadful in the postseason. But that's
postseason.
one of the few postseason performances where you can point to and basically say, if he doesn't do that, they probably don't win that World Series.
Yeah.
He was a force in that postseason.
So not that he'd be a marginal player anyway, by the way, but if you were to say his postseason career would be then sort of neutral, if you wanted to say that.
Yeah, that kind of saves it from being any kind of black mark against him.
Which we don't think should happen anyway.
We don't think should happen anyway. And even if it did happen, I think the giant shining check mark that is his entire career would outweigh the postseason performance.
So, another guy who was a rival of these three guys we just talked about, the Yankees, played up in Boston and is eligible, has been, and his time has come and gone to be in the Hall of Fame, and is one of the greatest right-hand hitters in the history of Major League Baseball. So what do you think about Manny Ramirez?
He does have the most postseason home runs of all time, 29, which is crazy. But
what was the steroids? No,
I mean the dude's a Hall of Famer. I mean, I remember saying there was like a Bleacher Report article where they're like, Manny only had 69.3 WAR, which is less than Tim Raines. It's like, yeah, he had 69.3 WAR while being a god-awful defender.
Right. That takes you down.
Like, if you took just his hitting WAR, I mean, the dude had a career slash line of like 300 average, 400 on base, 500 slugging.
411 on base average. Okay, that's not about hitting the ball, by the way. That's not hitting the ball.
312 career average, 550 plus home. I mean, the dude is to me, lockdown Hall of Fame.
Okay, was not a guy you could interview, right? Not an easy
Manny
guy
was going to be
Manny. Manny was going to be Manny, and he went out to left field on more than one occasion with a bottle of water in his back pocket. So that'll just infuriate the writers, thinking he's not taking himself seriously. But the dude was a serious hitter.
The dude could rake.
Yeah. So I feel the same thing. I mean, that he's not in is like,
he should have been in. He should be in. He's one of the greatest right-handed hitters of all time.
So I think we've covered most of those guys. There's one guy that we didn't talk about. And
he's a guy that's interesting to me. I'm like, he was way better than I remember. And maybe that's because I only saw him towards like the tail end of his career, but he ended up playing for like forever. And then I saw him play that one disastrous season for the Mets. Like, there was one or two disastrous seasons for the Mets. But that's Gary Sheffield.
So, and you're aware that Gary Sheffield calls Dwight Gooden his uncle.
I am aware of that. Is he actually his uncle?
He's actually his uncle.
I knew he called. I was never 100% sure about that, but like, when I looked at his career statistics, they were way better than I remember them being.
A feared right-handed hitter, a guy who was coming up. I just remember going, he just looked like he was going to mash.
But he almost runs into the same problem because he wasn't a great defender, correct? I can't really say.
I don't actually. I wouldn't put him, maybe on the lower. He was a versatile defender in that I think he played some shortstop, even mostly third base and outfield, if I'm not mistaken.
But if you're going to say Manny Ramirez isn't a Hall of Famer, and I think he is undoubtedly a more potent offensive player over a longer period of time than Sheffield certainly was, I don't know how you put Sheffield in. If Ramirez isn't in, to me, there's no way Sheffield should be in.
Right.
I think if you're going to say steroids, I don't know how much steroids impacted Gary Sheffield, or is he just not in because the writers didn't think he should be voted in on his stats?
No, he was sort of
caught up in that
with the steroids
he is one of the he is one of the more fringe guys. I feel like, but his career stats really aren't that fringe. That's a weird part about it.
Yeah, over 500 homers.
Good average, pretty good WAR if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Enough to be in that qualification. You look at the other things that he did, and being that guy in the lineup, right? For a lot of times, you put Gary Sheffield,
and he did it for a lot of teams.
A lot of different teams. He was a guy people like to trade.
And that's not something that should really count against you, though it probably speaks to what he was like in the locker room.
So, there are guys in the Hall of Fame that have been associated with it from time to time, allegedly or not. So, it becomes a popularity contest at a certain point where I don't know how, guys that, Ivan Rodriguez got in, and the writers, he was named,
granted, he was named up, he was named like Canseco, but... True. I defy anybody. I defy anybody to look at Ivan Rodriguez's career and tell me that man does not belong in the Hall of Fame.
There's a first ballot, by the way. He's a guy you could probably vote as a unanimous.
Yeah, he is to me either the best catcher of all time or the second best catcher of all time. Certainly. Yeah. I because he could do it all.
There are very. You didn't see Johnny Bench though.
I don't know how good, but Pudge was the best defensive catcher and the best offensive catcher.
Yep.
There are very few.
The snap throw for his knees was fantastic.
And at a position like catcher, for him to put up the offensive numbers that he did while playing defense like he did, there are very few guys more valuable than that.
So the way they have it now, there's a protocol for how they handle steroids. And we mentioned a couple of guys that got, and even Cano and whatnot. And I looked at Cano because I thought, could those 80 games possibly hold him back from Hall of Fame stats? And based on where he is right now, unless he bats like 10 the rest of his career,
he's probably a Hall of Fame. But I mean, he's a guy that's kind of helped out by the position that he plays. There have been very few second basemen that could have matched the offensive output of Robinson Cano.
324 career home runs at second base and winning Gold Gloves and batting 300 for his career. Okay, we're done.
Yeah. You had another guy like Ortiz.
Yeah.
When you look at Ortiz's career stats, I mean, and he has been one of the few guys that has never admitted to it. He is. But
he was named.
He was named. They tested him like crazy, but they were.
He was the most tested guy in baseball.
But they never were able to nail him.
Yeah.
And his career stats. I mean, one of the most clutch.
Big Papi's a really nice guy, and the writers love him, and everybody loves him. So he's going to get in, and they're going to kind of look away to that because the writers. It is a popularity contest at the end.
Because they, unlike him, since he never admitted it, you can play dumb in respect to him. You can't play dumb in respects to A-Rod because the dude was literally suspended for it.
He admitted it.
So it's like okay, you can't kind of not pretend it's not there. With Ortiz, you can kind of pretend it's not there if you want to, and I think that'll be enough to get him in.
Yeah.
There'll be enough people willing to do that for Ortiz. And I think a guy like Ryan Braun needs more time, I think.
Yeah, you talk about him.
His career stats are really good.
Right. If we're going to evaluate him the way we evaluate the other guys, he's got to be in the consideration set for sure.
But he still needs another 4 or 5 really solid years, I think, to make it a real thing for him. Because now his stats right now, if I remember the last time I looked at him, kind of look like those really good, those renowned home run hitters from the 70s and 80s, right. Except with just a slightly better average. He's got 380 something career home runs. I don't actually know off the top of my head, but it looks a lot like that. Where it's pretty good, but in this day and age, is that really good enough to get into the Hall of Fame? Probably not.
So we outside of the steroid guys, and we could talk about them for another couple of hours. There's another guy who's not in the Hall of Fame who has been put on the sideline for a long time, and that's the guy with the most hits in the history of the game.
Rose.
Yeah.
Yeah, he should be in. Let's not kid ourselves. He supposedly bet on baseball. And Rose
Not supposedly, I think
admittedly,
or they
but he didn't. Did he bet while he was a player or only while as a manager?
Well, nobody knows about his time as a player. I think most of this scuttlebutt was about him.
People obviously the assumption is he probably, if he did it while he was managing, he probably did it when he was a player because it's just hard to believe that there'd be some kind of difference. If you're willing to go that far at that point, why wouldn't you have been willing to go that far when you're younger and dumber? But he says he never bet against the Reds.
There's no evidence
that you could
of that.
I mean, there's no evidence of shoeless Joe Jackson cheating the 1919 World Series.
And would even let's say that something happened as a manager. If you looked at his career as a player, would you not put somebody in the Hall of Fame because later on he did something that wasn't Hall of Fame worthy, whether it is a baseball thing?
I mean, you could argue you wouldn't just betting as a manager disqualify him for being a Hall of Fame manager. It has nothing to do with his career as a player.
I guess I'm trying to make the same point, going, so if he were to be, a felon or something like that, we're going to start looking at character, with these guys and start saying, we can't put him in,
Yeah. Rose is a Hall of Famer. He should be.
And I feel that baseball, they made such an example of this guy and he has done very little to help his own case most of the time.
Yeah.
But, that they're going to wait till he dies to put him in. I think that's the punishment he gets. He doesn't get the satisfaction.
It just feels so petty.
And he wants it so much.
He should be recognized. Yeah. The man has 4,000 career hits.
Yeah. Got the guy with the most hits, and if you don't have that, what kind of a Hall of Fame do you?
Wasn't he Charlie Hustle?
He was Charlie Hustle. Yeah.
I mean,
it would look weird to you if you watched the guy run as hard as he did. A few guys do it today, but he was the first guy to run as hard as he could to first base on a walk.
That would be weird.
He would just bust it down there, and I was like what's wrong with this
guy? Just going
guy?
as fast as he can.
And he played a lot of different positions, but yeah, you and I agree. He's got to be in, and we probably would throw in Shoeless Joe at the same time, another guy who, accused of throwing the 19 World Series.
Yeah, but you pointed out to me, he hit 357 in that World Series. So unless there's some fielding play.
He hit a double in the seventh inning. He could have hit a home run.
Yeah,
that made the difference.
At that point, he clearly played well enough offensively. So the only thing at that point where you could argue that Joe Jackson's performance led to the White Sox losing was if he made some kind of defensive gaffe. And I feel like if there was some kind of play like that, everybody would be talking about that because you would just point to that play and see they bet against him and then he messed that play up.
Yeah, he and Rose can be members of the anti-Hall of Fame because apparently they get talked about more than if they were in the Hall of Fame.
Exactly. They're probably more famous as a result.
Yeah, it is. Final question. Mm-hmm. So we're still waiting for Major League Baseball to come to some agreement to play some games. And you could end up with a situation like you talked about in 1994 with the strike and the home run race and Major League Baseball looking the other way, maybe about what was going on with the steroids. Do you think it's possible that if baseball takes a hit on popularity because they're kind of screwing around here, that in that same situation, Manfred and the owners, if something is not right, they're going to sort of look the other way?
I don't think they would look the other way for something like steroids at this point, just because, one, the stigma is there to such a high degree, and two, I don't think steroids would be seen as benefiting the game in such a fashion where they would want to look the other way. But I think if there was something else, throwing out a random hypothetical here, some pitcher found some new illegal way to throw a pitch. And all of a sudden, it was oh, wow, these guys are throwing these crazy, and they're striking out guys all over the place. Now, there's guys are getting 15, 20 strikeouts a game because, I don't know, they found some weird loophole rule to exploit or something. I think they would look the other way. I think they would do that for anything that brought the popularity to the game. And the only reason why they'll then go back and nail it is that you'll have people that are being well, they shouldn't have been doing that. And I just think that's not fair. And I think that's what it ultimately comes down to, is that trying to say that somebody should or shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, I don't think has anything to do with the bad actions. Unless those bad actions can be directly attributed to their performance improving. If anything, in some respects, I would wonder if people would consider the sign stealing more detrimental than the steroids, because I would argue it's a hell of a lot easier to be a good hitter if you know what every pitch is coming than if you're taking steroids. So I think in the end, for me, I think they would 100% look the other way until fans started raising enough big stink about it. And honestly, that's what drives it all. If people aren't making noise about it, Major League Baseball is just going to do whatever is best for business.
And they always have.